Hey everybody, welcome back to Cheap Brew. This month's project is Mead. Now for those of you who don't know, Mead is a honey wine, which is basically just fermented honey in water. But having tried it just the other day, it is amazing, and I'm super excited to get started with this. So for your ingredients, you're going to need about 3 pounds of honey, 2 to 3 pounds, depending on if you want it to be dry or sweet. Dry being not sweet, and sweet, of course, being sweet. This is 2 pounds here, and I picked up another 12 ounces of it. So it's not going to be, hopefully, terribly sweet, but definitely want to keep it on the sweet side with close to 3 pounds of honey. I've got a gallon of filtered water right here, and yeast, which we'll get to activating here in just a minute. Don't use bread yeast. Never use bread yeast anymore. That being said, we are going to use bread yeast today, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later. In the meantime, let's get started by activating our yeast. It's really easy to do so. The instructions are on the back side of your yeast packet. Next, we take our yeast packet, tear it open nice and gently, and then we're going to pour it into the bowl. And make sure we got all of it. There's our yeast, slowly dissolving into the water. You can see them kind of dropping in there. Now it's time to put the honey and water together. Mead is like one of the easiest things in theory to make because it's just honey and water. So we got 1 gallon of filtered water that I got out of my sink. And we're going to pour maybe half of this into a pot and bring it to a boil. One side note here is that we're going to be boiling some bread yeast in that pot because somewhere, I read on the internet of course, that bread yeast is a yeast nutrient. So the yeast that we just are attempting to activate are going to eat the dead yeast, the dead bread yeast that is, and that is going to help keep them healthy while they work their way through honey. Okay, so we got our pot right here. We're going to pour some water in it, maybe about half of our gallon or so, maybe just a little less since we're going to be adding about 3 pounds of honey here. There we go. Okay, now we still got some room for the thing to boil and also some room to add our honey. Burners on high. So, Fleischmann's bread yeast right here. We're going to take just a little bit of this and throw it in this water here. And if this trick works, that's awesome. I was so happy when I found out that yeast are cannibals because then I didn't have to go back to the brewing store and purchase yeast nutrient. I'm going to put that in there. It's so cool the way that they just like go out. So the water's been boiling here for a couple minutes. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the burner here because this water is going to be hot enough for us to do what we need. I'm going to wait for these bubbles to stop, and then I'm going to add in our honey. So now that the yeast has been boiled to death, we're going to start adding the honey. Here we go. This is the first step towards something amazing, I think. This is clover honey that I bought at Walmart. I think overall I might have paid, I don't know, maybe $10 for all this honey, something like that. I've never, ever in my life used so much honey. There's all of our dead yeast floating by. So you need to get the honey completely dissolved in this mixture here. So we're going to be stirring for a little bit. And then after we're done stirring this, we're going to want to let it sit and cool down to the same temperature, or roughly the same temperature, as our yeast mix over there that we activated earlier. This smells so good. Alright, so we're shooting for right about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to guess it's going to come out more like 140. Alright, yeah, so we're looking probably pretty close to 150 degrees for the temperature of this right now. Okay, we're going to add just a little bit of cool water to this. Hopefully that helps cool things down. Probably 135 or something like that. So I think we're going to go ahead and add this to our jar. So you want to make sure that you've left just, I don't know, I feel a little bit nervous about even leaving this much water in there because I want to be able to fit all of the stuff that we put in that pot back into this with a few inches of headroom. So when we throw the yeast in there and it starts bubbling up, it's not going to pop out the airlock and make a big mess because yeast makes a lot of bubbles, and we'll show you that as we go on through this. So we got our funnel. We're going to put it right there. We're going to dump all that stuff through the funnel into our jar. Okay, so this is going to be a blast, I think. There's got to be a better way to do this, but we're not going to think about it right now. There goes all that nasty yeast stuff that we boiled into it. Meanwhile, our friends back in Yeastville have been very much so activated. That's about what it's going to look like. So these guys are ready to go in. All right, so let's take the temperature of this guy one more time. Here's our thermometer. Not so bad. It's about 110 degrees, so we're going to want to let it cool for just a little while longer before we pitch our yeast. That's a little more reasonable. 97.5 degrees. Okay, it's time to add our yeast. So to pitch the yeast, we're going to take our funnel and our yeast, give this guy a little bit of a swirl, and it's going to go into the carboy. And now we shake, shake, shake. So we're going to keep doing this for about a minute, and then we're going to put an airlock in, and then I'm going to go to bed and wake up in 3 hours. The next step is to let our mead ferment, which means all the yeast that we added in there are going to start turning all the sugars in the honey into alcohol, which we will eventually consume someday long down the road. So when yeast eats sugar, it creates carbon dioxide. That's going to be excess gas in there. We need to give that gas a way to escape, so we're going to use this airlock so that the gas can escape and we don't let any weird external yeasts back in. So the airlock consists of a rubber stopper and a container that you fill up to here with water so that the air escapes through here and it makes a bubble out, but no air can get back in. We're going to fill this with water. We're going to put it on the carboy, and then we're going to let it sit for a long, long time. So at this point, I'm going to take the black cap off and put our stopper on. So it's been about 5 days now since we started our honey must, and I wanted to take a minute to show you what fermentation looks like on day 5. It looks exactly like this. You cannot see a bunch of activity up at the top. What you can see are a bunch of little bubbles on the side, and they're actually going pretty rapidly. The bubbles are coming out of the top here in the airlock probably every 10 seconds, 8 or 10 seconds. We'll take a look at this in a few days and see if there's any difference, but we got a good steady ferment going on right now. So our mead's been fermenting now for about 40 days, which is just shy of 6 weeks. It is time to move it into a clean fermenter and get it off the yeast that's been settling at the bottom of the jug. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it out of the jar, and we're going to put it into these 2 bowls here, and then we're going to clean the jug, we're going to put it back in, and we're going to let the rest of the yeast settle out, and that's called clearing, and hopefully that gives us a nice clear mead in a couple of weeks or so. So I removed the airlock off the jug. At this point, I'm going to use this rubber tubing to siphon from this jug into these bowls. Because I don't have an auto siphon, I have to do this, using the gravity method. And since we want to make sure that everything is sanitized, since I'm using my mouth, this is straight tequila. We don't want any germs. So you can see that all we're left with in the jug now is pretty much just the nasty stuff at the bottom. Okay, after spilling a little bit of this glorious mead, and now successfully putting it back in the bottle, it's time to put the airlock back on and let it clear. We'll revisit this when we can see all the way through it. So it's been about 2 or 3 days since we transferred the mead into its clean container. It's really clear, and I'm thinking we have about 10 to 12%, which is good. That's a good place to be. We're gonna go ahead and put it in a bottle. I'm expecting to get 4 out of this, and maybe just a touch extra since these are 750 milliliters. We're just gonna cork them and throw them in storage so that they can continue to age and clear. But while we're in the process of making this segment, I've got 4 corks that I had tossed into the sink here, soaking up some water. And once those are all done in about 8 minutes, we're going to fill the bottles, slap the corks in them, and then we're going to put these little guys on. These are shrink wraps for the tops of the bottles. They go on as shown. It's going to make the bottles look so fancy. So let's get to it. So we had a little bit left. We're going to go ahead and take the leftovers, and it's pretty much saturated with yeast again because we did it the cheap way. And we're going to pour it into a mason jar, and we almost got 5 bottles out of that. So now it's time to try something that I have never done before. I'm going to put corks in these things and hope to God that I don't break any of them. I have a hand corker. This costs like $12. Having never used one of these before, I'm not too thrilled about it. Because I don't want to lose any of the stuff that I've waited so long to bottle. So to use this thing, you gotta stick the cork in here. If you can tell, you probably can't, but the opening here is wider than the exit because the cork's gotta get squeezed before it goes into the bottle. Okay, so there's our cork. There's our wine bottle. Here goes nothing. Ha! We did it! So the last part is to take these fancy little guys and stick them on here. Now these are PVC shrink wrap, and I was watching, of course, YouTube. Where else would you get information about what the best way is to put these on, because I don't have a heat gun. Boiling water. I'm going to do my best to not screw that up, but hopefully that gives us a nice good seal, and then we can just put these away. That actually works really nice. So there you have it. We got 4 bottles that look about like this when they're all finished. They are so beautiful. That boiling water trick actually does a really good job as long as you execute it correctly. This was fun. I can't wait to do the next one. Still thinking about what that might be, whether it's another one of these or some other things that I've been looking at. Doing it cheap is fine, but it would have been really nice to have an auto siphon. Here's the reason why. Between these two, you can tell which one has been done closer to the top of the jug and which one is not, because it's the bottom one is still hazy. It'll clear. It's just going to take a little bit. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, maybe learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.